Hello everybody, David Schuster here. There are growing indications now that the U.S. political establishment is in deep trouble. Survey analysis shows Americans on the right and left have record levels of anger towards the status quo. Democrat Alexander Ocasio-Cortez says the message is clear.
There is universal frustration in this country, much of it I actually think justified, that is raging at a political establishment that centers corporate interests, billionaires, and puts their needs ahead of the needs of working Americans.
Economic data underscores the working class frustrations. The wealth gap between rich and poor continues to widen. And even though working class wages during the Biden administration have been outpacing inflation, it's nothing compared to the growth of the highest earning Americans. The top 3 richest Americans hold more wealth than half of our nation. 78% of Americans now live paycheck to paycheck, and over 100 million Americans are saddled with medical debt. It's all a huge challenge for political leaders and both major political parties. But it also represents an opportunity, as underscored by Teamsters President Sean O'Brien.
The good news is that, the Democrats have an opportunity to refocus and try and reclaim why they lost the working class, and the Republicans have been saying all along they want to be the working class people. So it's a great opportunity for both sides, especially the Republican, to prove that. We've got a lot of issues that we need to get resolved in this country, and we've got to do it.
Those issues include a labor shortage in the manufacturing industry and worker retraining for higher tech jobs across multiple business sectors. Union membership has doubled over the past 5 years, and the GOP, which used to be the party of union busting, has been pledging to work with labor to try and solve economic challenges and wealth inequality. Donald Trump in particular has vowed to be the most pro-union Republican president in modern political history. And with that comes high expectations.
What do you want to see out of Donald Trump?
Well, I want to see what not only Donald Trump was saying, but a lot of the Republicans. We've got good working relationships with Senator Hawley. Right. We've got good working relationship with Senator Marshall, and many others. We want to make certain that what they're saying and what they do is going to be consistent. They want to work with labor. They want to work with the American people, American workers. And, we want results, not excuses. And look, the great part about this whole process is we got 4 more years. If people don't, on either side, live up to their promises and or fix their problems, we got 4 years to build a machine to get the right people in there to make the right decisions on working people.
The political threat and the strategy from O'Brien and other labor leaders is brilliant, because both major political parties are now actively vying for labor support, so unions can play the parties against each other to try to get even more help, concessions, and progress. It used to be the Democratic Party that was the party of organized labor and the working class, but big money interests and corporate desires have seeped into the Democratic Party. And Republicans who have their own allegiance to big money and corporate power have an opportunity if they can cut back on their fealty towards the wealthy and show more support for unions and working class. It all means the next few years should be great for organized labor, and in my view, that's great for the U.S. economy. When the middle class grows and expands, society thrives. When the middle class disappears, as we've seen in history, great nations fall apart. One key political point in all of this, the conservative right and the progressive left have at least one issue in common. They are both trying to get big money out of politics so that working class Americans and organized labor have more influence and corporate interests have less. And again, union leaders like O'Brien are trying to show they are not bound to either political party, as O'Brien noted in his speech at the Republican convention this summer. Here's a snippet of that speech, followed some by astute analysis from TYT.
We are not beholden to anyone or any party. Corporatists hate when working people join together to form unions. But for a century, major employers have waged a war against labor by forming corporate unions of their own. We need to call the Chamber of Commerce and the business roundtables what they are. They are unions for big business. Remember, elites have no party, elites have no nation. Their loyalty is to the balance sheet and the stock price at the expense of the American worker. I think we can all agree D.C. is a pretty treacherous area. Most legislation is never meant to go anywhere, and it's all talk.
By appearing, he's building leverage to use again with or against the Democrats.
Totally.
Okay. So he's saying, hey, listen, you guys take us for granted. Here I am giving a keynote speech at the Republican convention. I'm not playing with you guys.
Yeah.
And that is good, strong leverage building. There you go. That's using your power. Okay.
Yeah. He says he looks out the window in that speech. He said, I look out the window of my office. I look at the Capitol. I see all these people going in there. They don't do anything, basically. And so he didn't say Republicans or Democrats. He said the whole lot of you. And it was a fascinating speech. Mario Cuomo gave a very progressive speech at a Democratic convention that, would compare progressive speeches, but this was a speech about workers that this convention, a Republican convention, has never heard. And I don't think they're going to have heard it too well. I think he's going to get criticism from the people here.
Yeah, and so he mentioned corporatism again at a Republican convention. And so that corporatism is never mentioned in a Democratic convention because it's considered too radical to mention corporate rule. Again, partly because their donors finance the whole thing and their donors are all corporations.
Right.
But he connected, this is the most important part to me out of all of this. He connected the elites, because the Republicans always talk about elites, right? And they hate the elites. He connected the elites to corporations. So like when the Republicans do it, it's nefarious, but it's vague. It's like, oh, the international elites, global elites, right? And you don't know what they're referring to. They never clarified because, again, that's actually the people who backed the Republican Party, right? And the Democratic Party. So that's why they never clarified it. But he clarified it. He said, no, it's the corporate elites that run this country. And the Republican voters needed to hear that message because that's going to connect.
I agree, and I actually think that when you connect elites to corporate elites, it resonates across the political spectrum, even with people who are not engaged in politics. There is a fundamental frustration, as AOC said at the beginning, with the status quo and the ongoing corporate welfare, if you will, that goes to the most powerful business interests and does not seem to go to the working class. It's that old analogy about the US government and both major political parties doing more for Wall Street than for Main Street. A lot of Americans cannot articulate it or boil it down, but they feel the injustice and sense that our government and political system have been corrupted, and most of the benefits are going to the elites.
Most important point in terms of this particular election, okay? Donald Trump letting him speak, even if they didn't properly vet the speech, even if he didn't endorse him, and even if he gave a super progressive speech, was a brilliant move. And it's because it
was because you could say it now. You say it, and even if people don't hear the speech, well, the Teamsters spoke at the Republican convention, the head of the Teamsters. So it gives a union guy who didn't watch the speech or who doesn't pay close attention, but who votes because they always do. Well, if O'Brien spoke there, then we're good. And I like Trump.
So it's great for that. It also really burnishes his populist bona fides. And if you want to be populist, you say words like bona fides. Okay, seriously, like it makes him look like a real populist. And the other thing it does is it gives you some hope that he's going to listen to outside voices and be different than an average president. Now, is that true? I don't know, but it was true tonight. Yeah. And you do have to give him credit for that.
Indeed, Donald Trump pulled off a brilliant political move by having O'Brien speak at the Republican National Convention. And it clearly worked, given the larger than usual number of union voters who supported the Republican presidential ticket in this 2024 election. The big question now, as Cenk and Michael identified, is whether Trump actually follows through in his commitment to organized labor and governs with the kind of populist policies and tone he promoted in his campaign. Let me be clear. I do not think that Donald Trump should be trusted by anybody, and I would be shocked if he actually follows through with his populism. However, unions and organized labor now have more leverage over both political parties than at any time in the last 50 years. I've never seen a political environment so opportunistic for unions than the era we are in now. And union leaders like Sean O'Brien are playing it well, demanding progress from all lawmakers in Washington instead of promoting a Republican-Democrat divide. Organized labor is inviting everybody to be part of helping America's working class. And as as we started with this video, America's working class is raging and demanding big changes in Washington. The status quo and the corporate elite are now the obstacles that need to be removed or diminished in our political system, and the interests of Main Street, of the working class, need to be prioritized. There is no guarantee that lawmakers, even in this new era, will follow through, but this is a good time to be advocating for union and big labor concerns, because both major political parties now see the working class as political partners, and that itself is progress.
I don't like this policy at all. I think you've got a situation where Bernie Sanders is for something, the progressive left is for something, and the kind of populist nationalist right is for it. And typically when those two groups are agreeing, the policy is bad.
Gentleman, if you want to consider him that, is Michael Strain. He is the Director of Economic Policy Studies at the American Enterprise Institute. And he's not a populist. He doesn't like populists. And he's mad. He's real mad that there is currently a bipartisan effort to potentially cap interest rates for credit cards. And when I say it's a bipartisan effort, I'm not joking. This is a story that we covered last week. There was a Senate hearing in which Republican Senator Josh Hawley was really taking, representatives from Visa and MasterCard to task. And so I want to give you some more details about this bipartisan effort. So, surprisingly, Trump was actually the one to kick off this whole policy discourse. And this is what Trump's really good at doing, right? He's really good at presenting himself as this populist and then doesn't really deliver on things like this. So believe me, I'm not naive and I'm not holding my breath, but I would love for him to do this. And I would be very surprised, very happy, and I'd give him credit. But he basically pitched while he was on the campaign trail that he would temporarily cap credit card interest rates at around 10%, which, by the way, is still pretty high, is still going to guarantee significant profits for these credit card companies. But that cap is significant as well when you have credit card companies issuing interest rates at like 24, 25%. So, and that's for people who have good credit. I have great credit. I'm in the 800s. My credit card interest rate is 25%. It's wild. So now over the last month, Bernie Sanders did what I think is a great strategy. He reminded Trump of his promise, saying, I look forward to working with the Trump administration on fulfilling his promise to cap credit card interest rates at 10%. We cannot continue to allow big banks to make record profits by ripping off Americans by charging them 25 to 30% interest rates. That's usury. Now, Josh Hawley, Republican senator, jumped on board, also writing on X. Let's take a look at this. An anti-usury bill capping outrageous credit card rates ought to be a top priority of the next Congress. Now, during a Senate hearing with MasterCard and Visa, Hawley went on a tear about what credit card companies are doing in their business practices and how it's harming American consumers. Take a look.
Do either of you know how much debt is owed on your networks, Ms. Kirkpatrick?
We're not the bank, so we don't have visibility into that information. We also don't generate revenue from interchange.
Oh, okay, you have no idea. Mr. Sheedy, do you know?
I don't know.
Well, let me help you out. Let's have a look. It's $1.17 trillion. $1.17 trillion is what consumers now owe on your credit card networks. Do either of you know what the average interest rate is on your networks, Ms. Kirkpatrick?
Oh, Senator, we're not the bank. We don't set the interchange.
I know,
we don't set
you
the
benefit
rates
from it, and you know. Do you know what it is? This is your business model.
We don't collect revenue from interest rates.
Do you know?
I don't, Senator.
I mean, do either of you read the newspaper? Forbes magazine just estimated last week that the average credit card APR in your networks is 28.75%. Average.
That's pretty high. And that's pretty disastrous. And it's crushing Americans. As I shared with you all in a story I covered earlier today, credit card debt has reached 1.3 trillion. Okay. I remember doing stories about student loan debt when it reached 1.3 trillion and how disastrous that is for, the personal finances of all of these college grads. but those are, for the most part, low interest federal loans. When we're talking about credit cards, that's an entirely different animal, which is why we're starting to see credit card delinquencies spike up. So, by the way, that problem has just gotten even worse because interest rates on store branded credit cards just got jacked up even more. At least 50 companies, including Big Lots, Gap, Petco, Burlington, Macy's, and TJ or TJX companies, Marshalls, Home Goods, TJ Maxx falls under that umbrella, increased the APRs on their credit cards between September of 2023 and September of 2024, according to a review of data gathered by Bankrate.com. Now, the reason why they did this is partly due to the proposed rule by the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau that would have capped late fees at $8 per incident, as opposed to $32 and stuff like that. So essentially, they were expecting certain regulations to be pursued that could have hurt their bottom line a little bit. So they preemptively decided to jack up their interest rates for their credit cards even more. And so, by the way, the rule that I was referring to from the CFPB actually ended up getting tied up in court. And now it's unlikely that whoever Trump appoints to lead the CFPB would even keep that fight going. So that's something to keep in mind. But even though the rule never actually took effect, companies, again, decided to preemptively increase the interest rates on these credit cards. Synchrony and Bread Financial, which specialize in issuing branded cards for companies including Verizon and JCPenney, raised the annual percentage rates or APRs on their portfolios by an average of 3 to 5 percentage points. Bread began boosting the rate on some of its credit cards in late 2023 in anticipation for the CFPB rule. Bread CFO Perry Bieberman told analysts in October. And finally, cards from Banana Republic and Athleta issued by Barclays each saw an APR jump of 5 percentage points in the past year. The Home Depot card from Citigroup had a rise of 3 percentage points, while the bank raised the APR on its major card by 4 percentage points. So it is amazing to me that as these interest rate increases are taking place, you have this guy from the American Enterprise Institute going on CNBC, the prime place to do this, by the way, to trash Democrats and Republicans coming together on behalf of the American people, so they're no longer crushed to the extent that they're crushed by these, financial institutions. And I guess I'm not surprised, Waz. I'm sure you're not surprised either. But I think the real threat to the corporate culture in our government right now, or in our country right now, is a bit of a populist uprising against this kind of predatory activity. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, obviously CNBC is enemy number one of the people. That's where all of the oligarchs go to launder their rapacious business practices and all the fleecing that they do of the public and pretend that they're somehow, buttressing our economy and making our lives great by them themselves becoming richer than God. Like, nobody should be surprised that this kind of rhetoric happens on CNBC. And, Josh Hawley, like, obviously not the greatest politician we've ever seen, but he does fancy himself to be a more populist, new right, quote unquote, figure. And I'm not surprised that he's going after these guys. He's part of the wing of the Republican Party that's trying to steer away from, basically the ultra business focused establishment wing of the party and be more populist. Of course, they're pairing that with xenophobia and all kinds of other stuff. But like, this is like a path that Josh Hawley, JD Vance, that these guys are trying to blaze over in the Republican Party. And of course, Bernie Sanders, these are the kinds of policies he's been advocating for literally his entire freaking life, right? So we shouldn't be surprised. And when this guy comes out and says, it's bipartisan and it's annoying and it's populist or whatever, I think the listeners should just understand one thing: you shouldn't base your politics around a group of people who you found to be annoying. So just because Josh Hawley, who most of the times is super duper annoying, because he agrees with something doesn't mean I'm automatically against it. No, if Josh Hawley is for something that I think is to the benefit of the vast majority of the American people, of course people like Bernie Sanders should support it. Of course Bernie Sanders should remind Donald Trump that on the campaign stump that he was promising people to deliver lower interest rates on their credit cards so that they're not hampered and crippled by these payments. So yeah, I love it, honestly, to see this kind of bipartisan work in action, because usually, Anna, when it's bipartisan, it's just for wars and to line the pockets of the military-industrial complex.
You're absolutely right about that. Bipartisanship, I would even say 5 years ago, certainly 10 years ago, was like a dirty word for the left because it only meant one thing. It only meant that the Democratic Party was going to concede to the wishes of the Republican Party for pro-corporate policies or pro-war, international policies. And so I'm really happy to see a focus on financial institutions and to see any Republican on board for this issue. At least, for now, it is rhetorical, right? And in some cases, they will co-sponsor legislation, but a case could be made that they're doing that knowing that the legislation isn't going to pass. So it's an easy way to signal that you're looking out for the American people without really worrying about upsetting your donors, because that policy is very likely to pass. Our corporate captured lawmakers in Congress. But nonetheless, what I do like is seeing someone like Bernie Sanders keep his eye on the ball and continue bringing this issue up. Like, you guys say you want to do this, great. I want to do it too. Let's work together, because it's really holding their feet to the fire. Because if they're just engaging in populist branding to win elections, well, they should be held accountable for that by the voters who believe them, right? Next time around when they're up for re-election. And it's going to be difficult to do that when they're able to take on this branding without anyone ever challenging them or holding them accountable. So I think Bernie is real in wanting to work with like-minded people on policies they agree on. So I don't think he's just simply doing this as a strategy, but there is also that strategy component to it, which I think is smart. But what are your thoughts on that? Because there is a contingent of, or I should say like a faction of the left that just hates the Republican Party so much that they think, no, these people are liars. Like, you're helping to launder their reputations by pretending like they're economic populists. They're not, they're all corrupt. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, laundering their reputations, calling them fascists and besmirching them. Did that get anybody anywhere? Did calling them Nazis get anybody anywhere? Did, basically calling these people foaming at the mouth, racist, Jim Crow wannabes, did that get anywhere with this? So I don't understand how now the opposite, of that is now also the worst thing in the world, where your strategy didn't work. So the idea that people, and look, I will give these people the benefit of the doubt. It's exactly what the Republicans did to Barack Obama when he came in office, right? It's like all of a sudden they didn't want their own Social Security cut. All of a sudden they didn't want Mitt Romney's, healthcare plan. All of a sudden they didn't want all of these Republican sort of coded policies because they didn't want to, quote unquote, give Obama a win. And maybe that was the right thing for them to do at that time. But I think this is a much different political climate. And I just don't think people feel or the people that will make the margins for Democratic Party victories going forward, I don't think those people on the margins think that, hey man, we need to be pom-pom wavers and we need to just oppose any perceived political victories. I think people are doing bad enough in their lives that they want concrete wins for themselves, not political points for our freaking overseers in the damn government.